Morning.
Well, good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Hope
Well,
everybody's good.
Oh
Well,
so,
yeah. What is this
all
weather?
right.
Why is it so hot?
It is warm today, that's for sure.
mhm.
All right, so we have two stories today. The first story is actually a little hard to talk about because it's so big. It's not just one story.
Yeah.
So we're going to pick two stories within it. So the idea, the topic is, you remember last week we talked about the split of the kingdom, how Pastor Rebecca explained there was the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. Well, this week the topic is the northern kingdom. But we thought the best thing to do today is to read two stories from that time and from those books. And these stories are written in First Kings.
Yeah.
So we'll do that, and then we'll get to the New Testament in a second. So shall I go in and read these stories to us?
Sure.
They're
We get
short.
three. Basically, we get three stories today.
We do get three stories. We do. All right. So the first one, again, this is written in First Kings. Yes. No, this might be Second Kings. I don't remember. This one is. I'll read it and look it up in a second. Elisha feeds 100. The prophet Elisha worked for God. He gave the people messages from God. Elisha prayed for people and helped them give their offerings to God. A man went to see Elisha. I hope Elisha will help me, the man thought. He was carrying a special bag. The bag was special because he used it to carry his offering to God. Inside the bag were 20 loaves of bread. The bread was made with the first grains of barley that were grown in the man's field. The man walked up to Elisha and gave Elisha the bag. This is my offering for God, the man said. Elisha peeked into the bag. When he saw what was inside, Elisha said a surprising thing. Take this bread and give it to the people to eat. The man looked confused. He thought he was bringing his bread for God. Give it to the people? He asked. There are 100 people waiting to eat. How can 20 loaves of bread feed 100 people? Elisha repeated what he had said a bit louder. Take this bread and give it to the people to eat. The man still did not understand. He frowned at Elisha and took his head. When Elisha saw the look on the man's face, he reminded the man of God's promise. God promised to take care of us. God will give us enough food to eat. We will even have leftovers. The man finally listened to Elisha. Carefully, he opened the bag and gave the people the bread. He waited. Would there be enough? Could all 100 people eat? Yes, all 100 people ate bread until they were full. When they were through, the man helped clean up. Then he noticed a wonderful thing. There were leftovers, just as Elisha had said.
Mm.
All right. So what do we think about this story?
It sounds familiar.
Yeah, at first I thought it was, the New Testament.
Yes. It sounds very much like bread and fish and 5,000 people and Jesus in a field and a picnic and enough to eat and leftovers.
Yeah.
Well, you know what? When Jesus performed that miracle, I bet there's a number of people who remembered from scripture, because this was scripture for the people of Jesus's time, that this guy named Elisha had done a miracle similar.
Yeah.
And then you have Jesus taking this prophet's miracle that was written down, and that happened like somewhere maybe 800 to 900 years earlier, and then Jesus does it but bigger. So then that kind of says something about Jesus.
Yep, I think it does. It continues to connect Jesus to the Old Testament. And the other thing too, I think is interesting is this is a stewardship. This is about stewardship. Stewardship is for boys and girls as well. The things that we do after we say we believe. It's the way we give of our the offering, our money we have, our time, our talents, ourselves, how we live out our faith in the world. That's what stewardship means. So he's bringing the offering, but the offering, it shows that the offering is not, when it goes to God, it goes to other people. Just like when people support St. Matthew's and they give their offering to God, it's going to help the ministries of our church, whether it's to pay us to do our jobs at St. Matthew's or to care for the building or to help support other ministries around the world or do our own work here at St. Matthew's. That's what our offering does.
Mm-hmm. When it's given to God, it goes out to the people who need it. Mm-hmm.
Yep, that's right. Okay,
Awesome.
other story. Naaman is healed. Naaman was in charge of a very big army for the king of a place called Aram. He was a big, strong, and important man in his country. Sadly, Naaman had a disease called leprosy, which gave him painful sores on his body that would not go away. A young Israelite girl was a servant in Naaman's household and knew a prophet named Elisha, same Elisha, in her country who could heal Naaman's leprosy. When Naaman heard this, he asked the king if he could go to Israel to be healed. The king liked Naaman, so he told him he could go. Elisha heard that Naaman was coming. So Elisha sent his messenger to Naaman and told him to go wash 7 times in the river to heal his leprosy. Naaman was angry. Why didn't the prophet Elisha come here and heal me? I am an important man, he fumed. I could wash in the rivers in my own country. What's so special about this little river? He demanded. At least try, Naaman's servant exclaimed. We've come a long way. All right, Naaman muttered, and went to the edge of the river and stuck in his toe. Nothing happened. All the way in, ordered Naaman's servant. Naaman went all the way in and came out dripping wet. He counted with his big booming voice every time he went into the water. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Naaman washed himself in the river 7 times, just like Elisha said to do. After the 7th time, Naaman looked down at his skin. It worked! Naaman was shocked. Now he knew that God was amazing. He went home praising and thanking God. All right. What do we make of this story?
Well, you see water, so it's reminiscent of baptism.
It gives him life back, because in Jesus's time and Naaman's time, in biblical times, leprosy, we don't really see it so much in our part of the world, but leprosy is a very contagious disease that, it can be passed from person to person very easily. And it's a very harmful disease. And so if Naaman had leprosy, how could he have continued being king? Leprosy was the kind of disease that people got sent away from their towns and their communities for fear of passing on the disease. So the fact that Naaman was able to be healed of his leprosy and no longer pass it on meant that he could continue living his life as king. So it was something that gave him his life back.
Yeah. So it's life-giving, just like the bread was life-giving too.
And just like baptism is,
Absolutely. Yep. Daniel was right with that. That's for sure. So in 2 nice little Old Testament stories that feel a little like the New Testament, actually. All right. Next we have another parable from Jesus from the New Testament. And this is called the parable of the vineyard. Jesus loved to tell stories about vineyards and workers there and wine and bread and seasons of the year and growing and all this. So,
well, you know about vineyards, Pastor Eric.
I do know about vineyards. I do. All right, here we go. Parable of the vineyard. The Pharisees were a group of people who didn't like what Jesus said and treated Jesus badly. Jesus told the Pharisees a story to help them understand that what they were doing was wrong. Jesus said, a man built a vineyard and planted grapes. He hired workers to care for the grapes. When the grapes were ripe, the man sent his servants one by one to get the grapes. But each time the workers watching the vineyard hurt the servants. The man tried sending his own son, but they hurt him too. The Pharisees realized that Jesus was talking about them. Every time God sent someone to help them learn more about God, they were mean to that person instead of listening to what that person had to say. Jesus was there to save them, but they weren't even listening. It's another strange story, isn't it?
Oh yeah.
It's funny because like the Old Testament stories today sort of pointed to the New Testament, and the New Testament story today kind of points to the Old Testament, because you have that line in there about God sending servants into the vineyard and people were mean to the servants. But a lot of times when we look at that story, that's talking about the prophets, the Old Testament prophets, like Elisha. And we didn't get it so much in these two stories this morning, but life was hard as a prophet. People did some terrible things to prophets if the prophets were saying things they didn't like. So it's hard life being a prophet.
It is. People don't want to listen.
Mm-hmm.
Easier to not listen.
Mm-hmm.
Even when somebody's trying to help you. That's kind of what this is about.
Mm-hmm.
So 3 good stories again this week. Next week, we're going to talk about the Southern Kingdom. Now, there's so much in that one. That's a 2-week study. So I'm going to have to figure out what we're going to talk about for that for the next 2 weeks. Because there's a lot of material in those 2 weeks. So I have to see what's kind of most important for the boys and girls. And then we're going to talk about the Last Supper next week.
Ooh.
Yes, we're getting pretty close to the end of our. We have a little bit more. We have some more weeks, but we're getting close. All right, everybody.
All right.
Y'all have a great week.
All right. See ya.
Bye now.